Everybody, welcome to our January 11th, 2016 work session. A work session is a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight, we have 4 items on our agenda, and public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it into the city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of this item. Once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. Do we have any public comment tonight, too?
We do have one, sir.
Okay. Is that on item number 1?
Laura, what item is that for? General.
Okay. Are we good? General public comments?
Typically, at the work session, items that are spoken about are related to an item on the agenda, but again, it's this council's history to, if there's public comment to be made, this council likes to hear.
Yeah, usually we want to allow people to speak, but are we okay taking a general comment?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
Miss Laura Benton.
Yeah.
I will make this quick. 2500 Bethany Church Road. So often I stand before you, maybe under controversial circumstances, but tonight I wanted to come. Last Friday was tough. Chris, you can turn around. I'm here to thank Chris Lagerbloom for his service to our community. Dedication, integrity, tact, sensitivity, and commitment. And I speak for so many people. It's been a pleasure working with you. And so many other people, wish you the very best in your new job and along with your family. And I got this through security. This is, not all horses are good, but this was a good one. And I want you to have it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Sudi, if you'll please sign agenda item number 1.
Agenda item number 1 is delivery of timeline and discussion surrounding potential November bond referendum for green space. Ms. Stacy Inglis.
So, Mayor and Council, I'm going to start with this one tonight and then hand it off to Stacy in just a second. The new year is upon us, and one of the things that we've talked about in this year is exploring whether or not we should bring a referendum question forward in November to the public for the purpose of parks and green space. And it's an important nuance that we include the word parks when we talk about green space, because there's certain things that you could use publicly issued debt for and certain things you can't, and those two are typically commingled together. We need to start this conversation now, and we wanted to get it kicked off right after the first of the year with a calendar of events that would need to happen for the city to pursue this effort in the fall. A couple things that we're looking for tonight, and maybe some discussion points that we can have around this topic, is whether or not the council still desires to explore that for November. One of the things I want you to be aware of is that there's also the very high likelihood that there will be a T-SPLOS question on that same ballot. That's something that Fulton County is pushing, where they're contemplating asking the public for an extra penny for transit and transportation, or a combination of those two things. Having said that, there's some concern, or maybe not, so we just need to have that discussion as to whether or not we would want a bond question on that same ballot, and whether or not that effort of the county would influence us to either pick a different ballot or to just decide that it's still the correct thing to do. We'd also like to talk through a little bit about what this calendar looks like, and I'll let Stacy highlight those dates, and then talk about process and a little bit about what we envision happening now, so that we would be prepared for that public question to be asked in the fall, as well as the ramp up that leads to it in the form of a public campaign. So having said that, Mr. Mayor, maybe it's a worthwhile discussion right off the beginning, if this is even still something that the council desires to explore, and if the answer to that is yes, then we're prepared to bring further information.
Okay, I'll start. I definitely support, moving forward and exploring this item. So I'll ask the rest of the council, is everybody good moving forward?
I support it.
Yes. Yeah. Joe? Okay.
Can I take that support? Then there's we would move forward with this initiative, regardless of whether Fulton County brings any type of a question for additional funding for transportation.
I would say because that, we assume they are, the process is, it may or may not be on there, but again, and I can see the concern is maybe that, they're asking for a penny here and then, and folks, not wanting to pony up more money. Or on the flip side, if there's a negative connotation towards the T-Splosh from the voters, would that transfer over? But, that could work for or against it. It actually could work for it too. If folks don't want to spend more money on traffic, they may want to spend more money on land preservation to reduce the traffic. So that's my opinion. But
yeah, I think this is the year to do it because of the presidential election. I don't think we'd succeed if we had to call a special election, and the off-year elections are difficult. So I think this is probably the best in terms of just getting the most voter turnout, the most people considering it. Not that it would go either one way or another.
Perfect. Okay. Good. So then maybe, Bill, did you?
No, I think it's now or never.
and we even looked at possibly doing it in May, but it's almost impossible to do that too quick.
High voter turnout is the better thing for a referendum question. I'll turn it over to Stacy then at this point, and if you've got a calendar in front of you, we'll look at some critical dates that we'll need to hit in our timeline to lead into that, so that we meet all of the legal requirements as well as reporting requirements, as well as to be able to get this question on the ballot itself. And then maybe I'll ask our city attorney, who has been through a process like this from start to finish, to even through acquisition in one of the other jurisdictions he solved. I feel very confident that his level of skill and ability in helping us navigate through this, as well as bond counsel, as well as our staff participation. And then I'm going to ask one other question in the end, that we have the resources necessary to advance this item. So let me turn it over to Stacy.
Sure. The calendar that you have before you is something that was put together by our bond attorney that we used for the revenue bond that we got last year. These are critical deadlines that we have to meet. We can certainly do the adoption of the resolution. That is the first item on the calendar. The July 11th is probably the last day that we could probably do this. June 20th, we can also do it then. That was another recommended date to adopt a resolution requesting the call of election. You can read the rest of the items that are on the agenda. One of the things that we have to be mindful of is we're required to publish the notice of election 90 days prior to the election itself, and that's what this all hinges on, is backing everything up to where it works us into that 90-day requirement. I think this is a good recommendation calendar. We'll certainly work with our bond attorney and the Davenport investment firm financial advisors that we have to move us forward with this process. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about the calendar if you have any.
Stacey, can you clarify from what I understand, this can be something that obviously the council's pushing forward, but all we can really do is get the facts out. We can publish the facts, but not promote or not promote something like this. So, and I guess that may go more when we talk to Ken, or Ken talks on the process of that. There's an outside, if outside person or agency that supports or not.
We'll have multiple sessions to educate both the staff and the council as to what is eligible for discussion and what is not publicly, and what positions of advancing you can have, and what positions, frankly, of advancing a referendum that you can't have. So.
Sure. And also, if you recall last year, we even sent out a do's and don'ts supporting a referendum, and I can send that out again. I do have that list, and it speaks specifically to the mayor and council, city manager and employees and other staff, what we can and cannot do when it comes to a bond referendum.
Sure. Somebody else have a question?
Yeah, just one question on the week of August 15th. We have submit a form of ballot question to Kennesaw State University. Mm-hmm. Are they just basically collecting it, or do they have to approve anything we do as well? Could it be delayed on anything they do?
It's my understanding that they build the ballots for everyone, and I'm not entirely sure specifically what their role is, other than putting it together. Can you answer that, Ken?
I can. Yeah, Kennesaw actually reviews, and Stacy's correct, that they build the ballot, but they do sort of what's called the logical testing of the ballot to make sure that the ballot is understandable and reasonable for the purposes of the electorate. So that is, every jurisdiction I work in sends their ballot early to Kennesaw
Yeah.
State for that purpose.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
Okay, then let's hear
Okay.
from Ken on process.
Right. So, council members, thank you. I won't be very long, but I will tell you this: one of the jurisdictions I work in 2008, we did a $100 million park and green space GO bond, general obligation bond, which is a bond paid back by the ad valorem taxation of the jurisdiction. And so the key is what do you have to do on the front end of that? And of course it varies. I mean, there's no lockstep system, but it's the same sort of thing as it is in any time that you go and ask the voters to basically self-impose a tax on themselves. A GO bond is basically the voters committing and pledging the full faith and credit of the city and their taxation power to the paying off of the debt. Not a whole lot different than a SPLOST, wherein the voters are basically saying that we agree to pay a penny extra on transactions for projects. The key is always, number one, providing enough specificity for what they will be paying for and what they will be enjoying the benefit of, versus allowing the government to maintain sufficient flexibility to meet the demands of the future. That's always, at least the way I view it, sort of the trade-off. So going back and thinking about how it occurred in this other jurisdiction, that jurisdiction has about spent all of that $100 million, and my office has undertaken to close all of the transactions. So one of the things that I would ask the city to think about on the front end is, first of all, I hope you can follow me on this, identifying the actual discrete pieces of property that you may want to acquire is sort of you really can't do that. First of all, for a host of reasons. Number one is, of course, is if the seller understands that you want their property, then the value goes up, particularly if you've told the voters we are going to get it. And be mindful under the bond law that the representations you make to the voters as part of incentivizing them to vote on the bond become binding, right? And that would make sense because what you tell the voters you've got to deliver on. The better way, I think, to approach it is to develop criteria upon which you will then grade various pieces of property. In other words, what is of value to the city of Milton? Is it uninterrupted acreage? Is it the amount of waterways or streams on the property? Is it access? Is it centrality? And the list could go on, and I don't even mean to pretend to be doing an exhaustive list, but you get the idea. And that's the sort of thing I think that perhaps staff could look at, is give us a process where we can begin to put together some criteria and candidly even begin to perhaps put numerical, numbers next to them so you can literally take a piece of property and put it into an equation and then it'll sort of rank itself. So then you can then tell the voters, if we get to this point, here's what the city believes is important and how we will assess properties without necessarily going the extra step and saying, and here's the ones we'll buy, which is a whole different equation. So that's what I've seen. There's nothing magical about this. Any consultant would probably tell you a variation on that same thing. And we have the resources within the city of Milton to do and put together that very criteria. So that's my respectful recommendation to you. Once we do that, assuming that the voters then feel enough to approve the bond, then I can work with senior staff and we can get the properties under contract and hopefully acquire them.
I guess one of the questions I'll have for the council tonight is what group would you like working on the establishment of that criteria? I've had, our group that typically deals with future land use in Milton is our planning commission. And I've met with the chair of the planning commission, and they have, they would, if asked, they would have the capacity to work with Ken and I and Stacy and Carter and our staff to work almost immediately, beginning this month, on the and starting to work towards those criteria and priority scale. But I want to make sure that before I assemble a group like that and start working in that direction, that's supported by the mayor and council to to put together a group. I think it needs to be more than just our planning staff at the city. I'd like there to be citizen input into that process. I believe that that's important. I think that that's a very different group than what we might want to establish as a stakeholder group. If in fact the referendum is successful, that would be the first level of evaluation of properties that would come before the city, so that then we could bring to the council properties that have been vetted by a different and independent body. But I'll be asking you for that, or somebody will be asking you for that later this year. So I guess that's some of the direction if we're committed to moving forward and we're ready to do that. I think it's exciting. We have the resources, we have the talent, and we have the capacity. That's the question I guess I have for you tonight is this something that you would be comfortable with me taking to the Planning Commission and asking them to start to determining this criteria and priorities over the course of the next quarter?
Okay, all right. I certainly would support going to the Planning Commission. Karen?
Yeah, I would support the Planning Commission doing it. I think it'd probably be good if all of us sent you the things that we feel like are important, so we're going to have to be the ones to ultimately approve it. But if we could send to you the things that we think are important, and then you could have kind of a start to take to the Planning Commission. Like, to me, it's important if it's property that's adjacent to an existing park, that would be a priority. If it's at a location that's central to the city that we feel like we need a park, that's important. If it's a rural view shed of a certain other acres that we feel like. So I think if we could just send those to you, then it might give them a starting point.
That would be helpful. I'd like to hear if linear connectivity is important to you over tracts of larger acreage. So the good news is that if in fact we do take this to the Planning Commission, their meeting is the last week of this month. So we have a little bit of time, say last week, maybe second to last week, but we would have a little bit of time that I think it's very appropriate for the council to weigh in. If you'd like to send me those things that are important to you, that would be helpful to at least not to start the process with some of your direction already in hand would be helpful.
Okay, that's Bill.
I know a year or so ago, Laurel Florio got involved in this issue, and I don't recall what she all put together as far as how we were going to approach this, who was going to ramrod this thing through. Possibly we could review her notes and her suggestions, and as long as we have that available to us, I think that'd be a good starting point also. But I agree with Karen. I think collectively here we've dealt with this issue for quite some time, and I think we have some pretty sound thoughts, ideas of the direction that we need to go in. But I'd be in favor of giving the Planning Commission some direction. I think they need to know where our mindset is when we're kicking this off. So I agree with Karen's suggestion or proposal.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was going to mention what Bill mentioned. I know we had done some preliminary work on trying to identify or understand what kind of properties we might be interested in. I don't know what form or how detailed we got into that, but it might be something that we could dig up and dust off and see if it is still applicable. But
we can kick off with a baseline, but
yeah,
we'd kind of restarted at this point, I believe.
The other thing I was going to say, and I don't know if it's even possible because the charter of CPAC is, obviously vastly different than looking at this. But since we've got them engaged right now, and they're made up of folks from the Planning Commission, maybe there's a way for us to leverage those citizens as well, because that would be a good data point.
We can look at that. We can look at.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Have them involved too.
That's a good idea. And I'd also ask you certainly provide feedback to me in the form of what your thoughts are, and I'll take that to the Planning Commission, but feel free to pick up the phone too and call your Planning Commissioner and have a good discussion with them if you'd like as well.
Okay. Bill?
Well, I know they're getting involved in the comprehensive plan at the same time too. I wouldn't want to overload any one board or committee out there. I guess we need to take a poll of them too, find out if they have the time and wherewithal to to jump into this.
Before bringing it to you as a question or recommendation, I did answer that question. I did confirm with the chair of the planning commission that they believe they had capacity to work on this project.
Good, good.
Okay, Matt?
Should we utilize Milton Grows Green as well? I mean, it's in their charter to help us with these issues. I think that they could also add some suggestions on a criteria that at least the planning commission can then be funneled towards them where they can make some decisions too. I think we should at least invite Milton Grows Green to do that. Obviously, we haven't approved the leadership yet, so can they until we've done that?
I guess kind of the reason I came forward with a single board recommendation is just so that there's somebody that owns it. You know, somebody that owns it that will have a public process, and there will be a public process that the planning commission takes. I would welcome the commingling of many of our boards and committees by getting as much input as we could. I don't know that as soon as you establish a committee of 25 people working on the same project that it gets done with the efficiency that it needs to be done. Particularly because we're driven towards some deadlines. But we'll take whatever direction the council wants to give. We'll take and we'll figure out a way to make it work.
Well, if we have CPAC and Milton Grows Green working independently, coming up with their solutions, and then the planning commission vets those in different silos, so I think that would make the most sense. So that way they can work on it independently, make a presentation on what they believe. Planning commission, they can, yeah, we like this idea, no, we don't like that idea. And then at least it becomes a funnel process that then comes to us ultimately.
And I'll take that as direction if the council wants to do that. I think that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen working on a project that we need to get done in November. But if that's the direction that the council wants to go, I'm happy to do it.
You know, I would say this is certainly going to be a public process. And, you know, if CPAC and I kind of almost look at CPAC and the Planning Commission obviously working together, you know, they're kind of doing together as part of the group. You know, but invite Milton Grows Green and the rest of the public to certainly give input, listen to everything, and you know, give the Planning Commission their input on ideas and whatnot. So Milton Grows Green and any other citizens can put together some ideas and certainly give them to us and give them to try them to funnel through the Planning Commission first.
I think so long as they know what the deadline is, anybody can make a presentation. So if we're specific on that and they want to get together ahead of time, come up with that conclusion to make the presentation by the deadline, there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. A lot of smart people in all those groups. Right. And you know what I'd like to capitalize on is the fact that we have the ability to charge somebody to be responsible for an outcome.
Sure.
But to get as many of the smart people in the room as we can as we assemble the data that gets to the outcome.
One thing I want to mention, council members, very quickly, and just to put this on the table now, and this would be a part of the criteria that we're kind of grappling with, but just to put it on the table as early in the process as we can, because candidly we all learn from mistakes that I have seen made elsewhere. One of the things ought to be to consider the notion of the availability of any state or federal or other money that can be leveraged. A lot of times when there is this sort of an opportunity and this sort of funding available for the acquisition of green space, there are grants and other available funding sources that can be made available if you catch them early enough, and it allows you to leverage that money and make it go further if you think about it. And sometimes I have seen jurisdictions miss that. So, I mean, I know that your staff would not miss that, but I just raise it to say there ought to be, you know, when you're talking about buying, for instance, you know, perhaps something with several hundred feet of riparian stream buffer that's protected, well, there are agencies that will then join you because they have a mutual interest in buying that sort of, if for no other reason, you might get mitigation credits or something other of value, just to be looking at that. That might be part of the criteria we talk about.
Bill?
Having said that, Ken, appreciate your input along that line too. Since you've gone through that process in the past, sounds like you're more than qualified to head us in the right direction.
We will rely strongly upon the former experience in doing this in Ken's leadership ability as we work through it.
Thank you.
How are the payment terms on these usually? Are they 10 years, 15 years?
That's going to be a function
of us.
Of us. I mean, I typically see a 20 to 30 year.
Okay.
Stacy, were you going to address a little bit on, give us some examples on amounts and what that means to average citizen and
Sure. So our debt capacity is 10% of the total assessed value of the property in Milton. So our debt capacity is over $200 million if we went all the way to the 10%. I did put together some.
200 million might
Weird.
do it. Might do it.
Don't recommend that. I'm just letting you know what we could go up to. I did put together some information. If you recall last year, we kind of talked a little bit about what the debt would be based on amount, the term. You know, I looked at $10 million, $15 million, $20, $25 million for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And just to give you an example of what an average home value of $450,000 in Milton would be for, say, a $20 million loan over the term of 20 years, we were looking at a little over $150. And I think that at that time, we kind of got some direction that you felt that maybe the constituents would be okay with doing maybe $150 more in their tax bill per year. That's the average that we used at that time. I can give you some other information if you want to know what 25 million is over 20 years,
Stacey,
10 million,
Was that 150 per person or per household?
150 per household.
Household.
Based on
That's what I thought.
$450,000 house.
Right.
You know, I'd like to see what the numbers would be if you went up to say 25 or $30 million. We may be pushing the window there, but I'd like to at least see, and that way we could kind of compare with what we think maybe we can get out of that too. What we can
25
do.
million would be about $200 additional per year, and I'm assuming 30. I didn't do the $30 million, but it'll be probably 250.
Okay.
Do we have a bond rating yet from our last one, or no?
We didn't go through the bond rating process because we didn't have to with a private bond that we did. So we will have to go through that process with this.
Well, okay.
But I will say that the financial advisors did say that we would be probably along the terms of an A-, I think.
Bill?
Is there any indication that there will be any other property tax increases this year from Fulton County, possibly?
I have not heard. It's a little early in the process too, but I know that they're going through the budget process right now.
Last year was bad enough.
Yeah.
I'd hate to pile on this year.
If I hear anything, I'll certainly pass it on.
Okay.
Typical trend of this new commission is that we would see flat to reducing.
Yeah. Okay.
To hope.
Anything else?
Okay, I think I've got the direction. So just to summarize, if you're passionate about certain criteria, passionate about certain things, please get that to me as soon as you can. And then the city attorney and I will meet with the planning commission and other groups and others as we move forward. We'll touch in with you from time to time as to how the criteria are establishing, just to make sure that we don't need to correct the course that we're on. And I don't want to get to July and you look at us and go, what in the world is that? That has nothing to do with what we hope the outcome would have been. So, good deal. Mr. Mayor, I'd ask, as just a matter of process tonight, we do have a visiting lawyer with us to discuss the litigation that we need to speak about in executive session. I'd ask if you might consider taking that item out of order and doing that now so that we can get him out of here and then come back to finish the meeting with the refresher and the staff updates.
Okay. And also, I wanted to ask, add executive session on personnel. Should we do that at the same time? Or come
Let's
back
go ahead
into
and
a
just knock it out. I believe both the topics will be fairly quick. So if we would move to executive session to discuss litigation, talk and personnel, that would be great.
Okay. Everybody good with that? Okay.
Go ahead. Could you go ahead and officially do that motion and actually
Do I have a motion to move into executive session to discuss litigation and personnel?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor? Do we, yeah. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
That's unanimous.
I'll stick around here.
Okay.
on certain conditions. We'll discuss those later.
All right, Judy, if we could move on to our next item.
Our next item is an ethics refresher by Mr. Ken Gerard.
I never get to do this. I'll just stand up here and give my presentation. Is that okay? Talk better in my feet.
Name and address, please, sir.
All right, so I have some slides. These are slides that I have sort of modified based on my using them in other jurisdictions where I've provided an ethics overview. This presentation tonight is a product, candidly, of some direction that I got from the City Council that was given to staff at the last meeting just to do an ethics refresher. I promise this won't take too long, so let me give you some preliminary points. Number one, my position is I have been representing Milton for quite a while now, and I do believe that Milton leans forward on issues of ethics. Those of you, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, we have interacted typically individually with most of you. When you have had ethics questions, you ask me. And I give you guidance, and I will say that on the guidance that I have given you, I have never had one of you not take that guidance. And I don't mean to suggest that everything I always say is the perfect legal advice, but I appreciate the willingness of you all to seek my counsel and then follow it. And candidly, I would much rather you be in that situation than the alternative. That way, if there's anything that was done wrong, it's on me. Milton is a certified city of ethics and has been for quite some time. And you have an excellent ethics code. I will tell you, it is not an unusual ethics code. It's candidly a fairly standard ethics code. I will also tell you that there are governments in Georgia that do not have an ethics code. You may not believe that, but it's true. Well, we're not going to talk too much about the ethics code in Milton today. We're going to talk about ethics generally, and where I'm going to camp out today for purposes of this refresher is Title 45 of the Georgia Code. You may not have been aware of this, but Georgia law actually has ethical guidance and guidelines for all public officials. And most ethics ordinances in Georgia actually embrace most of these criteria, and Milton is no exception. In fact, if you look at Title 45 and you compared it to the Milton Ethics Code, you would see a lot of similarity, down to word-for-word similarity. So it is my pleasure to provide this brief presentation to you. My first slide, of course, is Reverend Ben. An ounce of provision is worth a pound of cure. Big believer of that. Obviously, one of the linchpins of good ethical conduct is to catch ethical concerns as early in the process as possible. And candidly, I can speak to each of you and say that I have seen you come to me proactively before an issue has even arisen that has any sort of an ethical stigma attached to it, and ask me for guidance well before it got to a crisis stage. I wish all governments worked that way. They don't. So I appreciate that. Let's go to the substance on this slide. These are typical legal ethics issues when I teach this course, whether it's for ACCG or to attorneys. We go over through some of these bullet points. Some of these are obvious. Some of them other jurisdictions grapple with, like nepotism. I don't see Milton really grappling with that too often. I don't see gifts or honoraria that often. So the typical ones that you see here in Milton are ones where you all have either a potential or an actual conflict of interest. And that's very typical for most jurisdictions, and you catch them early and you do what you need to do. And so the standard is, of course, that with respect to conflicts of interest is you identify the conflict or perhaps even the appearance of conflict. And we can talk about that, the difference between an actual conflict and the appearance of conflict. You identify the conflict and then you announce and you abstain. And most ethical issues are addressed satisfactorily by those very steps right there. So if you were to distill ethics down to a soundbite, what would it be? This is my takeaway, and so this is when I'm like advising new elected officials, even before they take office, how do they catch this stuff? What is the gold standard? What is the aspiration? The aspiration is to ensure that all of your decision-making in your official capacity is the product of detached and neutral and objective thinking, governed by the dictates of your conscience and the law. If you do that, then you will typically make ethical decisions. Because remember, the notion of a conflict of interest, what does it mean? Each one of you act as a city council member but you are tasked, and in that function, with making official decisions. And so what the law wants you to do is ensure that your official decisions are the product of the conscience, your conscience, and the law. And they are not the product of any self-motivated interest. That's it. I mean, it sounds easy, but that's it. So, for instance, if someone is in front of you and it is in fact a business partner of yours and you're in fact a silent partner in the business and the city of Milton is about to take official action to which, based upon that action, you could in fact enjoy financial remuneration because of your silent partnership with that entity, do you have a detached and neutral interest in that, or do you have a conflicted financial interest? And the answer is, that's an easy one, obviously. The answer is yes, you do. And so how would you address that from a conflict of interest standpoint? You would in fact announce your affiliation with that entity, and then you would recuse and have no further part of it. And of course, the notion of recusal, what does that mean? I could tell you some more stories on that. I won't because of time considerations, but the notion is that when you recuse, you are out, not just a little out, and it doesn't just mean the vote. It means even the deliberation. It even means the influence. It even means the informal lobbying that may go on with respect to a legislative action. You're out, altogether out. Now, do you have to leave the room when you have a conflict of interest? The answer is no. So long as you have announced and abstained, you may stay in the room so long as your action is going to be taken in a public meeting. If we were to, for instance, enter into an executive session where you had a conflict of interest such that you had to abstain from an action item, I would make sure that you left the room during that executive session item. Why? Because it's not in the middle of a public meeting. So going through very quickly these bullet points, we've talked about conflicts of interest. Economic interest is very closely related. If there was, kind of one, the quintessential forbidden fruit of ethics is, of course, having an economic interest in subject matter for which you are otherwise expected to take official action on. If you have an economic interest in that subject matter, then you should recuse. But even with that, there are nuances that I want to get into because it goes to the heart of what is in fact an interest in the first place. And I want to address this because I think there's some confusion on it. Disclosure of confidential information. This is the example I always give when I speak on this. Let's assume, for instance, that we were in a situation where we were in an executive session and we were talking about a piece of property that the city was going to buy for a park. And let's assume that now that you know we're going to buy this park property, and so you rush out the next day and you buy the property right next door to that park property because you know that as soon as Milton puts a big, nice park on the property value of the property next door is going to skyrocket. That would be unethical. You would then have therefore taken the privileged and confidential information you received in the course and scope of your official city business and leveraged it for the means of personal profit. That's unethical. Okay. Personal use of staff or property, that's the last bullet point. I only raised that one. Again, this is an overview, so understand this is untethered to anything that is going on in Milton. This is me just giving my generic preaching on ethics. But personal use of staff or property, this is a big no-no, and actually, candidly, folks, depending upon the severity of the personal use of public property, and people can go to jail for that. Obviously, it's all based upon the significance of it. For instance, if you did a little bit of personal work on your public computer, would you go to jail? No. But if you borrow public equipment and take it home with you and do personal work on it or run a business out of it, you can get in trouble. Okay? So again, there are times when ethical issues blanch over into something more than just ethics. Let's keep going very quickly. So the Code of Ethics is actually found at OCGA 4510.1, and as I mentioned, this is applicable to all public officials in Georgia. And it talks about things like loyalty, upholding the Constitution, providing a full day's labor. I'll get into that, given that I know that you feel like you probably give more than a full day's labor. Well, let me just go through them, the slides. The Code of Ethics for Government Service in Georgia is wonderful. It's got wonderful, aspirational, ethical guidelines. And again, these are all in the City of Milton Ethics Code. So every one of them we have sort of brought into the City of Milton Ethics Code. Put loyalty to the highest moral principles and to country above loyalty to persons, party, or government department. It's a remarkable thing in the age that we live in that embodied in Georgia law is the notion that we are to put loyalty to the highest moral principles as a requirement of ethical government service. When I am teaching this to people, they forget that they are astonished that that's actually embodied in our law. But it's there. To highest moral principles, above everything, above party affiliation, above persons. Number 2, uphold the Constitution, laws, and legal regulations of the United States. When you see the mayor swear people in, or you saw our judge swear people in, people are swearing to do this, to uphold and support and defend the Constitution, never be a party to the evasion of the law. There's a lot in that, by the way. There's a lot that is suggested by that. But we are to uphold the highest law of the land. Number 3, perhaps having less application to you, give a full day's labor for a full day's pay. That's more in the context of employment within the government. Seek to find and employ more efficient and economical ways of getting tasks accomplished. I'm often asked, is getting things accomplished in an efficient and economical way the highest ideal of government? From an ethical perspective, the answer is no. The highest ideal of government is not efficiency and economy. It is transparency and accountability. My position is that efficiency and economy are secondary to those because we are spending other people's money. If you want to see economy and efficiency, McDonald's is the place for you. They can put up a building overnight. But if you want, when you're spending taxpayer dollars, accountability and transparency is I think, the fundamental precept. These, however, are aspirational. The next one, the middle of the page. Never discriminate unfairly by the dispensing of special favors or privileges to anyone. I love this, whether for remuneration, money, or not. And never accept for yourself or your family favors or benefit under circumstances which might be construed by reasonable persons as influencing the performance of your duties. So how do you know when that's occurring? Most of us have that red flag in the back of our head that lets us know that the opportunity we are being provided is meant to influence us in the performance of our official duties. And what government law, ethics law in Georgia anticipates is that we would say no. We will not accept whatever it is you're offering because my belief is, and that the perception of the citizens watching me is, that you are offering me that in an attempt to influence my taking my official duties and undertaking my official duties as a Milton public official. The last bullet point there on this page, make no private promise of any kind binding upon the duties of office, since a government employee has no private word which can be binding on public duty. The point of these last 2 bullet points here is sort of embodied in the notion of equal protection of the law. You know, if there's one hallmark that government, whether embodied in your staff or whether embodied in your elected officials or candidly even embodied in your lawyer, is that we are to treat everyone the same. Everyone the same. And so the notion of even giving special favors, even if it's not for money, is improper. Why? Because we should not give special anything to anyone. We are to treat everyone equally and the same. And that is a component, candidly, of ethics. The same. The next one I think should be obvious. Engage in no business with the government, either directly or indirectly, which is inconsistent with the conscientious performance of your government duties. That is, we need to be mindful that even with respect to our outside activities, your sort of your non-public official activities, that you need to ensure that those activities are not such that they conflict with what, for at least the time period with you're in office, is your highest ideal. And your highest ideal is the performance of your civic duty. Your civic duty is you ran for and were elected to be elected officials. It is a public trust. And therefore you have to tailor your private activities to ensure that the ideals with which you have sworn your allegiance are upheld. So you must engage in no business with the government, directly or indirectly, which is inconsistent with the performance of your government duties. The next one, never use any information coming to you confidentially in the performance of government duties as a means for making profit. We talked about that. That was my executive session example. I could go on. But the notion is in the context of your work for this government, you will be subject to confidential information. You may not, as a matter of ethical propriety, leverage that for personal gain. Period. Expose corruption whenever discovered. We could talk about that, but the bottom line is if you become aware of illegal stuff, you need to raise it. And if you have questions about who you raise it to, talk with me about that offline, and I'll tell you. The last one is the one that just, I love this because I think it embodies the notion that we as both public employees, public attorneys, public elected officials, we have responsibilities and aspirational obligations that are bigger than us. Every time there is a discredited public official, every one of us suffers because, unfortunately, there are citizens that watch those individuals being discredited and think, well, that's happening in my jurisdiction as well, just they've not been caught. And the reality is that's not true. The reality is most public officials show up, want to understand the rules, want to provide good service, ethical service, objective service, ethical service, and go home. And within the context of providing that service, we have to be mindful that we have a public trust, a covenant, if you will, with our citizens, and have an ethical obligation to uphold those, even if not for yourself, for the office. You know, the notion that we should leave our office better than it was when we found it. I think that is embodied in 45.10.1, that last bullet. Very quickly, as part of my overview, the ethical rules are a little different within the context of zonings. The General Assembly has adopted the zoning procedures law. The primary consideration that we need to be mindful of in the zoning procedures law is that if you have a conflicted financial interest with respect to property that is the subject of zoning, the rules are you have to disclose it at the earliest available opportunity at which you become aware of it. It has to be disclosed to your governing authority, in other words, to your fellow council members, and it has to be in writing. That's a little different than just your typical announce and disclose. The ZPL, the Zoning Procedures Law, anticipates that that disclosure will be in writing.
It specifically says the law requires county commissioners to disclose.
Well, Councilmember Lusk, I have not modified it to include city. This is applicable to both. So thank you for the catch. It would be applicable to both county and city officials. So a lot of times when I'm giving this, it may be to county officials, but it applies to both municipal officials as well. And of course, once you disclose, then you must stay out of the debates, out of the discussion, and out of the influencing with respect to that zoning. I'm going to end very quickly. I've kind of gone through my slides, and I know that, to the extent that you want more from me and this was not enough or you wanted more, I can do that at a subsequent meeting. But I want to go over just a few points that are specific to the Milton Ethics Code. First of all, I want to talk about the definition of an interest. I have been sitting here talking about a conflict of interest. Actually, interest is a defined term under the City of Milton Ethics Code. Interest means a direct or indirect pecuniary, financial, or material benefit accruing to a city official or employee as a result of a contract or transaction which is or may be the subject of an official act or action by or with the city. I'm going to skip a few parts here because I want you to hear this. The definition of interest does not apply to contracts or transactions which, by their terms and by the substance of their provisions, confer the opportunity and right to realize the accrual of similar benefits to all other persons and or property similarly situated. My point being is that when Milton, for instance, adopts an ordinance that has citywide application, I have heard individuals approach the council before and say, you are about to adopt an ordinance and you, council member, have something to do which may derive some sort of a benefit from that ordinance, but the ordinance is applicable citywide. It's applicable to everyone. And my position has been and continues to be that therefore, if that opportunity to enjoy that same benefit applies citywide, then it does not act as a disqualifying conflict of interest, even though it may similarly provide you that same benefit. Does everybody understand my point? I hope I've made that clear. I know I have sent out correspondence to you before, but I think that is not only the correct interpretation of the Milton ethics rules, but I think it is also simply pragmatically the truth. I mean, every time a jurisdiction adopts a new zoning ordinance, every time you modify the zoning code, if any of you are property owners in Milton and or even prospective property owners, then you could derive that benefit. I mean, if the rules were that exacting, most elected officials would have to recuse for almost all ordinances of citywide application, because you would enjoy the benefit of all of them, or the obligations of all of them. I want to mention one more thing, and this is toward the back of the Milton Ethics Ordinance. To avoid the appearance of impropriety, I've been talking tonight about conflicts of interest, but there is such a thing as an appearance, and let me tell you what my generic definition of an appearance is. An appearance of impropriety is you may not have a bona fide financial or interest-based conflict that is truly disqualifying, but from your position, it is close enough, or the public perception would be obvious enough that you feel an abundance of caution you need to recuse, because as we know in government particularly, sometimes perception is reality. And, I have been very, I hope you would believe this, candid with you, that if you approach me, I've been willing to say, you know what, that's close enough. I could support a recusal, even though you don't have an absolute financial conflict of interest. But I get your point, and I'm willing to support that. Your ordinance anticipates an appearance of a conflict of interest, or the appearance of impropriety. To avoid the appearance of impropriety, if a city official or employee has a conflict of interest, or has an interest that he or she has reason to believe violates this article or may affect his or her official acts in any manner, the city official or employee shall immediately leave the meeting room, except if the matter is being considered at a public meeting. The city official or employee may remain in the meeting room. I know that has been a subject of some discussion. I wanted you to hear me read it to you. Because I know some of you have been questioned even by citizens, why did you stay in the room? That's why you did. And that's why I did not raise my hand and say, jump, you need to leave. If you choose to leave, that's certainly fine. You have no obligation to. So that is my presentation. I want to thank you for the opportunity to give it, and just know that I stand, as always, ready to address your ethical questions. Please let me hear them, and I will provide you guidance, and then you can know that if there's an issue, it'll be on me and not on you.
Ken, I just want to take this opportunity to make an observation, and it's interesting as it's been almost 10 years now. I think everyone that's served in the city of Milton has been extremely conservative and made sure that there's no conflicts of interest or whatever. And sometimes I think as an elected official, and especially the public, feels like we're boxed into where, you're really limited in what you can do. But sometimes you also have to look at the reality, and you and I have discussed this before. Even though this is a paid part-time position, I know in my case it's maybe 5% of my income and 50% of time or whatever. It's not your full-time job. So in a municipality, a local municipality, where the majority are part-time positions, all of those people that are on council, if they're not retired, they have to work and have some kind of business or job. And I can even say on our council, I think there's only one of us that doesn't actually do their business in the city of Milton. And so we've discussed it. It's, use an example of somebody on a council or a commission owned a restaurant. And, of course, things they're going to decide on other restaurants, it's going to affect them. So, you have to have a little leeway. I think we all feel, I know I feel very strongly, we should not gain anything personally from our position other than helping our community. But on the flip side, we have to keep in mind, we should not lose benefits that we already have outside of our position as long as there's no conflict.
Right.
obviously shouldn't give up things as long as they have no conflict or interaction with city or your government position. So I think sometimes we have to realize that too, that, if this is something that I did every day in my normal life before I was an elected official, and there's no conflict, and I'm not getting any personal gain from this, sometimes there are things that you necessarily have to do, but people might look at you funny. So it's nice to be able to have you to bounce things like that, as everybody has, to make sure that we're all covered.
Well, that's right, and it's my pleasure to do that. And again, the council members are always very, very quick to come and ask me those questions. It's interesting, though, when you get into some of the smaller jurisdictions here in the metro area, we have, obviously a lot of population, and that's fine. But one of the things you always have to remember too is this: in some of the smaller jurisdictions, there's not that many people there, and so the people on council or the board of commissioners know everyone. And typically are many of the business owners, and candidly are some of the sort of the influential movers and shakers. And I'm suggesting you are that too. But my point is when you begin to lower the pool of people, these issues, if they were as overwhelming that, oh my gosh, the person that's out in front of you for that zoning. Well, in some jurisdictions, everybody knows everybody. And so the notion of being able to make it this antiseptic process where if you happen to have any sort of an affiliation with anybody, you are absolutely disqualified, it doesn't comport with reality, particularly the farther you get away from the metro area. So I just offer that up.
That's part of my point. Matt?
Ken, one quick question. There's obviously, as the council makes decisions, there's a process by which information flows up to us before we make a decision, whether it comes through BZA or Planning Commission or things like that. And obviously, as council members, some of us really work to understand issues at different times and come to conclusions prior to that process being done. Yet, when we do that, recently I've been accused of being unethical for having a opinion on something prior to maybe that process being completed. Now, that's not necessarily an ethical issue. That's more of a governing choice, I would think. But your thoughts on that?
Right. So a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, I'd like to keep it within the context of land use, if I could, or zoning, if I could, just for a moment, because that's where you typically see that sort of a concern raised. Zoning is in the context of legislation, and I think it would be out of touch with reality to suggest that as legislation comes up, the sausage is made, if you will, that you as elected council members are not going to form positions about that legislation at different stages of the process. Some of you may form your final decision the night of the final meeting. Some of you may be against it from the inception. I don't have a concern with that from an ethical standpoint. I don't think any of you are supposed to check your common sense at the door when you become an elected official. Where I do provide caution is in zoning processes that involve discrete pieces of property where I see individuals go out, and I'm not talking about this jurisdiction, I do this a lot of places, and go out and present their position on a particular zoning case before there has been an opportunity for a public hearing. The point being is everybody deserves a fair shot to influence you at the public hearing. And if I know when I walk up to this podium that, Councilman Longoria, you're against it no matter what I say, because you've put that on Facebook and you've sent out a blast to 5,000 emails, then when I come up in front of you, I'm wondering now from a due process perspective whether I have been afforded due process, because I know you've already made your mind up even before I've had the opportunity to engage you. That's different from the situation I think you were raising when it's more of the creation of a law. Does that answer your question? I hope it does. Yeah, that's the way I feel.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to staff reports.
Got some staff reports tonight, Mayor and Council. We're going to defer the second one, Public Works, to the next meeting because Carter went to attend another meeting on our behalf. But we'll start tonight with an update from the police department. Chief Krokoff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be brief. I just want to hit on two points. Recently, a couple of weeks ago actually, our Sergeant Ward, who's in charge of our training, received the 2015 Operator of the Year Award from the North Fulton SWAT team. He received that because of his motivation, commitment, and positive attitude. And those of you who know him know that's exactly what he embodies. And they feel he's greatly affected the morale of the team, which is, I feel the same way how he's affected the police department. He's redesigned their firearms program, and that's something he's currently doing for the MPD as well. So we're excited for him to be able to bring those skills back to the department. Why this is even more important, I'd say, or more weighted, is he is the only member of the Milton Police Department on the SWAT team, and he achieved that award. So it was nice to see that they recognized his individual accomplishment in a team setting, and we're very proud of his accomplishment. So I just wanted to let you know of that. On Wednesday, I will be addressing the working group of the U.S. Attorney's Heroin Task Force. I've spoken about that a little bit up here in the past. I've been heading the legislative committee for the past several months, and we are currently looking at a bill that is in the legislative counsel's office that is designed to strengthen the current prescription drug monitoring program, the PDMP, and in effect to close that gateway from prescription drug abuse into heroin addiction. So we're very excited about that. The proposed legislation is still being drafted. As soon as I get a copy of that, I'll make sure, if you're interested, to get it out for your perusal. But we're excited about this opportunity. This similar legislation has been before the state before and has been shot down. But some of the pieces we have right now, including the support of the Medical Association of Georgia and the Georgia Medical Board, we believe will add that extra weight needed to be able to get this important life-saving legislation through. So we're very excited about that. Any questions?
Okay, any questions for Chief? All right, thank you, sir. Okay,
All right, we'll move on to Jim Craig with Parks and Rec.
While Jim's coming up, I did want to say that Carter's not here. I actually had a constituent ask me the other day. They said, "Boy, we've seen a lot of dead deer on the side of the road that have been picked up lately. I wonder how many dead animals Milton picks up a year." And I said, "Well, through November it was 94," and they were very shocked that we actually kept track of the number of dead animals we picked up on the side of the road.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I too will attempt to be briefer perhaps than police. Just a couple of simple things to report tonight. You may be aware a month ago we hired a new employee, Mr. Tom McElveen, and so far in his first month on the job he's been doing very well, and he has achieved what's called a CYSA Certified Youth Sports Administrator certification, and I'm encouraging him to work on his CPRP, Certified Parks and Recreation Professional. So he's doing very well. We're excited to have him. You may have heard that we have some roof leaks at two of our facilities, the Bethwell Center and the Thomas Bird Senior House. The Thomas Bird Senior House was quite a challenge, but we're moving forward with a contract to get that repaired, and you folks may be seeing that contract very soon. As far as the work at the Bethwell Center, we've got a temporary patch in place for checking out, and we have some more work to do there. We have spring sports starting up, and boys lacrosse has topped 370 participants, and as a result, they're going to be using both of the artificial turf fields at Bell Park, and for the record, that's still not sufficient capacity. We are still going to be using some of the grass fields that we have at the schools. But they're not as desirable because, of course, they don't have bathrooms and lights. But you know, that's where the demand is. Baseball is moving along very well. They're currently projecting to be around 400 players by the time they finish signups at the end of this month. And last thing we got is we're a little bit behind right now, but we are doing our contract renewals for all of our service providers. You have any questions?
Questions on the park? Matt?
That Bill Memorial, is the trail done yet? I know the bridge is still
The
being worked on.
asphalt trail is done. The natural walking trail is not yet completed.
Do we know about when that will be done?
We are having a meeting with the contractor on Thursday to try and see if they can give us a clue when they will be done.
That is?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Community Development has several projects underway. The first is we're undertaking the 5-year update to the comprehensive plan. We had the first meeting of the CPAC committee on December 16th, and the next scheduled meeting will be held on Tuesday, February 9th. Secondly, we are waiting for to hear whether or not the grant application we submitted for Livable Centers Initiative to update the master plan for downtown Milton has been granted to us, and we hope to hear by the end of the month, if not sooner. Next, we are finalizing the RFP for a unified development code for the city. Next, we're finalizing an RFP for the wayfinding signage program for downtown Milton. And lastly, we have finalized the update of the City of Milton Historic Structures list. In terms of rezonings, we had one submitted to us just at the end of last week, as a matter of fact, and it is a CUP application for 50 lots on approximately 64 acres, and this site is located essentially at the end of Ebenezer Road, right next to the school property. City Council will consider this application at its March 21st meeting. The proposed text amendments are working their way through. These are the text amendments that relate to the increase to the rural view shed as well as to the design for subdivision entrances. The Planning Commission held the first of its 2 planned workshops on this on December 10th. The next scheduled workshop will be on January 27th, and then the Planning Commission will consider these items on February 24th, and you all will see these at your March 21st meeting. And then lastly, we have a text amendment that's making its way through, and as it relates to the Deerfield form-based code, which is essentially a correction that we're bringing forward. And you will be hearing this next month at your February 18th meeting. Are there any questions?
Bill?
Let's go.
First, thank you for the historic structures survey.
Our pleasure.
Get working on that. Secondly, on the LCI grant application, what's the alternative should we not get that?
Oh, that's an equally good question. Well, at this point, we're hoping that we do get it. Staff is getting a little squeezed, I guess is a word to use, in that we have an RFP moving forward for an urban unified development code and for also for the signage for downtown Milton. So, but if we don't get it, we will certainly regroup and see to what extent that we can do this in-house, or if perhaps there might be some money in the budget, and maybe the city manager would want to say something.
I'd be happy to comment. Yeah, Bill, I think that this was an opportunity that presented itself at a time that we were looking to do this. So we took it as an opportunity to see if there was alternative funding before we just approached the council and said we'd ask you to add it to the budget. I've heard from several council members that a downtown plan for the Crabapple area is vitally important. So having heard that direction without having identified funding, I would look to identify funding to do the plan anyway. It just seems as though we should at least pursue optional or not optional. We should pursue alternative funding before we just assume that we needed to fund it from the general fund.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. Come on down, Sarah.
Good evening. Just a couple fun things to share with you and then some dates I want to make sure y'all know about. First of all, it looks, there are at least discussions that the TV show Sleepy Hollow, it's on Fox, They are in talks with the Old Blind Dog to do some shooting out there. In speaking with the scout, I got an email saying they were looking for an authentic Irish pub. I immediately called him, asked him if he knew about Old Blind Dog, and told him that there was also a location in Brookhaven. And he said, no, we've worked in Milton before. We want to go back to Milton. We liked working with you guys. So that's some great feedback from just some scouts. We have the Milton Business Alliance is doing their State of the City address here with, obviously, the mayor. January 19th at 6 p.m. You guys are all, I don't know if you'll have that on your calendars. I can email that out. As well as the North Fulton CID is having their legislative reception on January 21st, if y'all have gotten that invitation. Don't know. And then Advance Atlanta is a group that was formed out of the Millennial Advisory Council that I was on with the ARC. And on January 28th, they're having a transit expansion event to kind of educate the public on 400 and the proposed MARTA and all that coming up this way. And that's on January 28th. I don't know if y'all have that information either. But just those 3 events are coming up in the next couple of weeks that I wanted to make sure you guys knew about. Any questions for me?
What day was the CID?
That's January 21st at Oak at Avalon. The North Fulton CID's legislative reception that they do every year.
Anybody else? Anybody else for Sarah? Okay.
All right,
Thank you. All right. Is there anything else anybody needs to bring up or want to bring up?
Roll Tide.
Not.
I didn't think
Roll
I'd ever
Tide.
say that. I know, but for tonight, just tonight. One night.
All right.
I gotta go SEC over ACC. So tonight, I'm Roll Tide.
All right. We will adjourn our meeting. Okay. Thank you, guys.